Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Elise Hatton, and I'm the Smart Hub Business Manager. And it is my pleasure to welcome you once again to our Lunch and Learn. We had a Lunch and Learn just last Tuesday, and usually we space them out a bit more. But I think the single touch payroll for small to medium business is such an important topic that we had to do it early in August. We have, as always, a phenomenal speaker, an expert. David Frisch is joining us today to talk to us about how all of this works and how to comply. David is a very experienced business person, and I know you've all read the marketing, so I'm not going to talk about how he has 700 million in under investment for more than 1,000 clients, etc. That everything is in the marketing. But what I do like to tell you about David is that 2 years ago, as a business owner, David decided to prioritize his health. Is that right, David?
Pretty much.
And so now David mostly rides his push bike to work. He does the park run every Saturday morning. He ran 5Ks in 38 minutes 2 years ago. He's brought that down to 5Ks in 25 minutes. And he ran 8.5Ks just the Saturday gone. That's pretty good, right? And I think as business owners, it's always a good idea to prioritize your health and to be active and to do a good job in all aspects of your life, not just in business. So well done.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, David. We look forward to listening to you.
Thanks, Alice. Well, I will say, talking about the running is a lot more. I never would have said this 2 years ago, but talking about the running is a lot more interesting than single touch payroll. and part of that is such a lot of people that turn up, like things like Park Run and the Rocky Road Runners, which I've joined, and it's just nice to have some really positive people around. You know, they G you up and spur you on. So I would recommend that. So today we're talking about single touch payroll, which is a new initiative implemented by the government/tax office. And what it replaces is the old idea of group certificates or the income statements that businesses had to provide to employees at the end of the year. So the way it used to be was that you get into the first part of the new financial year, and within a couple of weeks you had to produce an income summary for each employee. And you know, especially for businesses that've got employees coming and going through the year, that was a lot of work, because it was you know, you had to go back through all your records, get how much you paid everyone, and depending on how sophisticated your accounting software was, that you know, can be quite a significant task. So what's happened is that this new idea called single touch payroll has completely replaced these payment summary reports. The way it does that is the information is collected directly from the employer and uploaded to the tax office, and I'll go into that in a minute. But it basically means that payroll has to be always up to date and compliant. And you know, if you wanted to put a negative spin or approach it from a significantly compliance point of view, you'd say that the ATO has now the ability to watch you from pay to pay about whether you're actually paying your employees as you should, remitting your PAYG tax to the ATO, and paying superannuation as you should. Now, people complain about that. They think it's an extra burden, but my personal view is that it's long overdue. There's too many businesses around that think that paying tax and super is an option. And you know, really, if you can't pay your tax and you can't pay your super, you really shouldn't be in business. You know, that's the guts of it. They're fundamental obligations to pay your employees properly and to pay what's due to the ATO. Now, that's not to say you should manage that as hard as you can, but regardless, the obligation's there, and it's an obligation of being in business in Australia. Now, how this works is that you install, well, there's a couple of ways, that this can work, but for larger employees, this should be as simple as, once you've loaded it all up in your system, it's pretty much as simple as pressing an additional file button on in your accounting software, and then that shuts it through to the ATO. So it's not that difficult. And that really just tacks onto the end of your payroll process. If you have less than 10 employees, the ATO has made some concessions so that you can either go through a bookkeeper or you can access some low-cost software options. And some of these options are less than $10 a week, a month, if I'm not mistaken. So that it's not expensive. If you choose to work with an agent, and we're agents for this purpose, you can report the payroll figures quarterly. So you can go through a bookkeeper. So if you really didn't want to do this yourself, and I'm saying it's a good discipline to learn about it and do it anyway, right? But if you didn't want to do that, you can actually go to a bookkeeper or an accountant and get them to do this for you. And if you do that, then the documents, the data only has to be submitted quarterly, rather than every pay period. But see, there's no real issue about submitting it every pay period. If you're organised, you're running your pays anyway. So if you're organised and you've got it all set up and you press the button and submit it, I don't see really how much more difficult that is than having to front up to the bookkeeper with all your data once a quarter. Some of the conditions that for using bookkeeper and accessing that concession are that you have to have all your tax and superannuation obligations up to date. You can't enter into this with a great cloud hanging over your head. You have to be up to date before you enter into make that agreement. But it can be, you can be behind in your tax payments, but as long as you've got a payment plan in place. But see, basically, whatever obligations you've got to the ATO, whether it's paying on the day or paying as it's due, or you're working to a payment plan, either way, that the ATO will class you as up to date. And then you can enter into that sort of arrangement. The registering for this needs to be done in conjunction with your software provider. So if you're using Reckon, for example, Xero or any of those, you need to contact them and they'll give you some additional files to add in, and then you link that up with the ATO website or data system, and then that's how the data gets shunted through. So again, there's a bit of fiddling about, but once it's up and running, it works pretty well. Only if you're a very small business do you need to go through a business activity statement agent, which is basically a bookkeeper. And this, as I said before, this standalone software that we're talking about can cost as little as $10 a month. So if you're not using any software at all, you can get very simple software that the ATO recommends using for as low as $10 a month. So when any of these things come in, there's always a whole heap of discussion or rumour out there in the community, in the business community, about all these things that you should or shouldn't be doing. And some people even go as far as saying, oh, just ignore it and it'll go away. But you can't do that because although the ATO this year has said that they're going to take a lenient approach and just help, i.e., I'm from the government, I'm going to help you, it's really an oxymoron. But they've said that they're going to help implement this. So if you're caught by this system, you've got to start implementing it. Now, if you get it wrong, make a mistake or something, the ATO is not going to come and chase you and fine you as long as you're upfront with them and get it sorted. The obligations apply also if you're just a sole trader and pay yourself a salary. So just because you're the only person, if you're paying yourself a salary out of a business, you've got to treat yourself as an employee. Same thing. And that's even if you don't pay yourself regularly. Like if you go to your accountant and the accountant says, oh, we're just going to treat this as wages, as they often do, sometimes they'll just say, oh, that's drawings, other times they'll say it's wages. So if they're saying it's wages, this has to be reported through the single touch payroll. The second myth is that it'll cost a lot of money. Well, it actually doesn't cost very much at all to do this. Like, there is some back office fiddling around, but once it's set up, as I indicated before, the software that you can use is the ATO mandated software for as little as $10 a month. But also on top of that, you know, the add-ins to your existing software, the cost of it's negligible. So there's not a great big cost there. Some people thought that the 1st of July was this terrible cut-off date, whereas if it didn't work, then you were going to go to jail. Well, that's not true. I mean, you know, I've had a lot to do with the ATO over the years, and they're actually pretty fair. You know, well, they have to be fair. I mean, there are some horror stories, I know, but from my day-to-day experience with them, they've actually been pretty good. I mean, there's not too many organisations that you can ring up and press 2 to get an automatic extension to your payment obligations, which I just think, I mean, how easy do you want it? That does seem like you're certainly not going to get that ring in the bank and saying I'm not going to pay you. So, you know, the ATO, you know, I won't say they're lenient, but they are prepared to work with you and get this up and running to everyone's benefit. What's in this data? What does the ATO want to see in it? It's the employee's full name, their tax file number, the gross payments for the year to date, the tax and superannuation for the year to date, and the payroll details, which is pretty simple. If we're looking at some tips here, well, I'll skip these because I actually thought it was better off to have a big on tables. I think one of the most interesting things about this is more of a philosophical issue about how to run a business. And really, all these things should be up to date anyway. And the ATO shouldn't have to go to the trouble of always checking, because business people should do what's right, in my views. And one of the reasons that they don't do what's right is that a lot of these things they perceive are really difficult, or just an add-on, an extra level of red tape, you know, an extra level of red tape to running a business. And that's sort of true, but the way to deal with it isn't to go and hide under your bed, i.e. ignore it, or to, you have to do it. Ignoring it's not a good idea. So a better idea, another way to deal with it that's not very productive is just to say, this is a real big burden, I'm just going to put it aside and I'll find some time to do it, which never happens. What you've got to do with any of these things, any of these compliance related things and things mandated by the government, you've got to get them involved in your business in some way so that it just becomes part of the normal day-to-day of running the business. And the way to get that in your head so it actually works for you is to make it valuable, for your business. Now, I started, I'm not sure if it's in the documents, but I started our business from scratch. It was just me and a desk. And I used to hate compliance, and I used to hate policies and procedures. And so much so that it's a running joke about, now I've got to do new policy and procedure, and I get involved in it, and everyone thinks, well, 10 years ago you wouldn't touch it. But now I'm saying, well, we need it. So there's one particular person in our organisation that's always pays me out for them. And now I realise the value of them. And they are a burden if you just say, I have to do this. You know, it's got nothing to do really with my, it's got nothing to really do with my business. The way to get value out of it is incorporated as a fundamental part of your business. So if you're doing your BAS, you're getting your GST up to date, your pay-as-you-go tax obligations, the withholding, and you're getting it all in a form so it's ready to report to the ATO. So it's getting done formally. If you don't do it on your BAS, you're going to get interest charges the ATO is going to levy interest charges from you. Anything that's still outstanding, they'll levy charges against that. Could be penalties for making false and misleading claims. And when you get into that situation, you end up losing control of your business. And if you're in that situation, you really don't know where your cash flows are, because if you did, you wouldn't get in that situation in the beginning. So if you take all that seriously, you're going to get a benefit out of it, one of which is to consider the full costs of running your business, rather than looking at solely week to week. You start looking at your business as a living, breathing thing. Let's take into account all of the costs of running this thing, and that then leads to questions like, am I pricing right? How much does it really cost me to provide this service? And if you don't do that, you're really cheating yourself. You know, if you're saying, oh, I'm cash flow positive, but you're only cash flow positive because you're not paying the tax office, or you're not paying the employees their super, you're not really in business at all. You're just borrowing money off the tax office and your employees, most probably, which you can't pay back. So it's a great discipline. These are great disciplines if you start incorporating them in your business. And the trick is to incorporate them in such a way that to produce this stuff isn't any real extra burden. Single touch payroll, again, you know, the payroll obligations, if you don't do it, you're going to get interest charges again. There's false and misleading type penalties, and again, you've lost control of your business payroll. But if you do it, you're acceding to an externally imposed discipline to keep payroll, tax and superannuation up to date. You're going to stay out of the news, and employees are going to make sure they're paid properly. For you?
That's a good thing.
Sorry?
Out of the news.
Yeah, well, I mean, well, certainly for that. I mean, how many do you see that, like lately, there's been, well, probably in the last 2 weeks, half a dozen of places not paying their staff properly. Now, mind you, there's some unders and overs, and I think some of those are genuine mistakes, but I still don't accept that in a sophisticated organisation, well, you know, organisations like those big restaurant companies that are on, you know, very well known, or you know, 7-Eleven, there's no excuse. I mean, maybe once in a while an error, but not wholesale errors. That's just really not, the work's not being done properly. Superannuation, you've got to report your superannuation, or you've got to adhere to your superannuation guarantee obligations. Otherwise, there's again interest charges, there's shortfall interest charges, there's false and misleading penalties, there's, it can be classed as a criminal offence, and you might lose control of your business. And not only that, I didn't put it here, but directors can be personally liable for not paying superannuation. So in the event of a liquidation or wind-up, you can't, a bankruptcy is not going to get you out of that, they'll come after you. So, and that one again, staff are paid properly and you keep out of the news. Now, I sort of then generalised this idea about doing these process things that are mandated by government departments, for example, and then thought, well, for the purposes of this group here, what other things could you be participating, or might be useful for your business, or seen to be a pain in the backside when actually if you do them properly and integrate them to your normal work, that they might actually turn out to be beneficial to you and help you run your business better. And one of the ones that we have at work is we're licensed financial advisors and tax agents. So there's a whole bunch of things that we have to do for that. And part of it is a risk matrix. So basically looking at all the different risks of the firm, to the best of our ability, looking at the different risks that the firm might be facing, and then assessing how likely they are and what the severity of them happening would be on the business. So, you know, like in our business, because we look after such a lot of money for people, an unexpected fall in the market. Okay, well, how robust are we? What are we going to do about that? And just thinking about these risks then makes you think, okay, well, if that happened, what's my plan B? How am I going to manage this? Are my portfolios, in my case, structured properly? But if you're a mechanic, same thing, you know, a risk is tools hanging around the workshop. Can't find stuff, or gets flawed, you know, people steal tools, or someone trips over something. and you end up with a big compo claim. You know, each business has got certain risks, and you know, if you're in IT, you know, many of the businesses, the intellectual property style businesses in Smart Hub, for example, you know, you'd be looking at people appropriating your intellectual property. You know, that's a risk. How are you going to manage these things? And setting up something like a risk matrix, which is often part of being licensed, for example, licensed in that formal sort of way, allows you to assess these things, and that's really beneficial for the business. And you can set in place structures to help you do that. So preparing licensing applications often includes a risk matrix. And even if you're not doing a license application, it might be worthwhile doing one anyway, a risk matrix. You know, if you don't have the license, in that case you're not able to operate, and sometimes these risks, you know, you want to know your risks, otherwise they can put you out of business if you can't deal with them. And focusing on them and designing ways to manage them is really, really valuable. And that links into the single touch payroll and all the best things that we're talking about. You know, if you've got your act together as far as single touch payroll goes, you know that you're going to be up to date with the ATO, you know that you're going to be up to date with how your employees are paid. You're not going to have claims against you on that, in that regard, from employees, and you're not going to have the ATO ringing up and saying, where's my money? And believe me, when that happens, it's too late. It's, you know, you can't ring someone like me and say, help them. It's, you know, pretty much boat sailed. I mean, we might be able to negotiate with the ATO for something, but usually the times, there's just not enough time to fix things at that stage. Then there's insurances that you might need to get. So business, professional indemnity, directors and officers insurance. Those, when you apply for these things, you're going to need a detailed proposal. And again, these things help you keep in mind the sorts of things that you'll be insuring against. And you know, I say that because a catastrophic event could occur that might lead to the closure of your business. But it might not be catastrophic, it might be just a gross inconvenience as well. Having your equipment insured if someone steals it, or if you know you lose a vehicle that's required to run your business. Well, if you have that in place, you know, or you make a mistake as a director, or an advice that you've given people, you're going to be able to continue, as long as your insurance policies, but you're going to be able to continue to run. So, you know, it gives you a chance to fight another day, as opposed to being shut down. And you know, the way that happens is these insurances replace capital and lost income in the event that your business turns down, or maybe is affected by cybercrime or any of the other myriad things that can happen to you, either through act of God or a mistake. And then another one I've written down here is key person insurance. You know, again, you have to submit a detailed proposal, but just thinking about key person insurance, that's when you're insuring someone in the business that's really important to the way the business runs. So let's say you're running a program, a software business, and you've got one person that just knows all about one particular part of the software, and if that person's not there, you know, it's really difficult to replace that knowledge, or at least in any short term. So by having key person insurance in place, if that person died or went to hospital for a long time, or you know, totally and permanently disabled, and it's set up appropriately with appropriate agreements behind it, then the business can get money from the insurer to keep operating until you've been able to find a replacement. So they're really just, I've just put those down there at the end. They're not strictly related, it's not strictly about single touch payroll, but I just wanted to try and plant the idea, or plant the seed of an idea, that these things seem like an obligation, but if you approach it in the right way, then and integrate them as part of your business, they can actually help you run your business in exactly the same way that all these other things that I've listed here can do that. You know, if you embrace it and make it part of the day to day. That's it. Thank you very much. Any questions? If you go through a bookkeeper once a quarter, every pay cycle. Yeah.
So just on the back of that then, David, does that mean that you're paying your tax and your super every pay cycle? Is that what you mean?
No.
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 You're
It's
just reporting on it.
you're reporting on it, so that my view, and I haven't seen this written, is that matching up what's paid to the employees directly from a primary source, with what's being submitted in the VAS. And if there's a discrepancy, then a red flag comes up, and they say, okay, well these two don't add up. Better make the phone call.
David, you might have already covered this because I came in a little bit late, but is it just reporting payroll at the moment, or is it already reporting super as well?
Payroll and super.
Okay, as that one July sort of thing.
Yeah, well,
Smaller businesses.
and the very small businesses not till September, so
Yeah.
that's if you go through a VAS.
Okay, so if someone hasn't done anything yet, what should they do? Go to the ADO website? How do they?
Yes,
what are
go
the
get
steps?
yourself set up. If you haven't done anything yet, get yourself set up. Or if you're a very small business and really don't feel confident with this, then find yourself a bookkeeper or a tax agent. Could be a bookkeeper, could be an accountant. You can come to us.
Was the Xero accounting program?
Yes.
It just prompted you to connect, and it then tells you the process of
Yeah.
going to the ATO to register, and then it's just automatic thing, and every time you do your wages, you just click link, I think it is,
Yeah.
or there's a particular word, and it just automatically goes straight to the ATO.
Yeah, so some of
that's
them,
the finish of the thing, isn't it? You don't have to worry about it anymore. You don't need to do
No, it's set up
any
then.
other processes. It's once you've done that wage for that week and you've the link, that's it. It's all over and over. Everything's done.
yes.
You just then have to concentrate on your superannuation and your VAS
Yes.
on a quarterly basis.
Yeah, and depending on what software you use. So right at the moment we're changing from Reckon to Xero at work. So there's been some mucking around in some of our entities are on Reckon still, and some are on Xero. And so there's been if you can't work it out yourself, you can ring the ATO and they're pretty helpful. And also the people at Reckon were pretty helpful
There is
too.
a question, and I think I haven't gone any further with mine yet in Xero, is that it's asking for a balance. So I'm not really sure what that's on. Do you use Xero, or have you looked at it?
I don't use it personally. I'd have to take that question on notice. I'm not really sure what.
It comes up every time I do the pay, and I just haven't got around to do anything about it as yet, but there's still, I think, another process to do, that you must have to put in a balance for each employee.
A starting balance, maybe?
A starting balance.
Yeah, well, that would make sense.
So where would that come from? Is that the 1st of July? That
Well,
would be a starting balance?
yeah.
So is that just zero? Or, naught? Because until you pay them, or what would that balance be?
Karina, do you know the answer to that?
Nancy's very rude in that.
Right.
But would you have to put money as funds aside for that employee to anything out of that?
I think I would take that on notice. I don't know the answer. I don't sit here and do that all days, but I can email Elise with the answer to that.
So can your employees log in and get their payroll summary now? Is that?
Yes, sorry. So
Yeah.
something I missed in this was completely the other side of that, which is how this whole discussion started, because the newspaper sent me through a list of questions. Our local newspaper sent me through a list of questions about this, because they realised that they weren't going to get group certificates. So nowadays you've got to log into MyGov to or go to a tax agent. So it used to be that your employer gave you a group certificate. Well, nowadays that doesn't happen. Nowadays you log into MyGov, which means you've got to set up a MyGov account. Now, that's not the easiest thing to do. You know, I've set one up, and well, my family has set several there now, and it's something that takes some time. So you know, you've got to put a lot of identification information in, and then there's dual what's it called? Dual
Authentication.
Verification, all that sort of thing. And you know, it can take you a morning to set all that up. And then when you've got it set up and then you get in there, then for each, you know, well, in my case, we've got Centrelink, the NDIS, ATO, and there's something else. Medicare. So yeah, exactly. So for each of those, you've got to then set them up individually. So you set up this head thing under MyGov, and then you've got to set up all these individual ones. Well, for people that are, you know, elderly or not computer literate or maybe disabled, it's a really big ask.
You just can't be bothered even.
Or couldn't be. Well, that's the point. See, if you can't be bothered, all this information is going to be in there, and you will have to go to a tax agent because that's the only way you'll be able to get it, as opposed to going through MyGov. But you know, I mean, I've had some experience with MyGov. We were working with some people on an extremely remote cattle property, and it was, you know, we were trying to track down lost super for a lot of these ringers and people, you know, and as you might imagine, they're not, you know, intellectually, or not, that's the wrong word, they're not academic people. They're, you know, obviously really good at what they do, but they're not academic people. And it was after I told the boss I was going to help them that I realised that the government had closed the lost super. It used to be so easy to track lost super, but now they've closed that, and you've got to get into an individual MyGov site. Well, can you imagine these people out there that are riding horses and ringers every day, and they're, you know, setting up MyGov, and even if they were sophisticated enough to use a computer, you've got to have the dual verification, well, which comes through on your mobile phone. Well, you don't have to drive very far out of town to realise that that's not that robust. So, you know, the MyGov thing is, I think it's got some issues to go down. Its accessibility, I really do. But anyway, that's what's been set up. And if you're in the business of helping people, probably holding their hands and helping them set up MyGov is probably a useful thing to do with your time. Is there any other questions? I'll get that answer for you about that specific detail, that balance.
Is that it? No more questions? Okay, well, David, thank you very much. Thank you so much for
It's a pleasure.
talking to us about One Touch Payroll and for always contributing to the Smart Hub. We really appreciate your involvement in our community. Investment Collective and David French, thank you so much.
Thank you, Elise.